Thanks to Funcom for sponsoring this video. The wait is almost over. Dune Awakening, a new open-world multiplayer survival game from Funcom, arrives on June 10th. And while we've played through many iterations of the game as part of early testing, we finally got to go hands-on and record ahead of launch, exploring and uncovering the many secrets of Arrakis. My name is Kodiak, this is Legacy Gaming, and this is our ultimate preview for Dune Awakening. 2025 has already been an incredible year for gaming, but if there's one game both Livid and myself were waiting for, it's Dune Awakening, because survival games are honestly just our jam. It's been a minute since an MMO survival game really made some noise, and building on the popularity of the recently released movies, we're confident this game is going to see tens of thousands of players jumping in on day one. Dune, like many survival games, thrusts you into an untenable situation, without really telling you what it is you can do or should be doing. But unlike most modern survival games, there are some serious RPG elements that truly define the game. If you're familiar with Funcom's other MMO survival game, Conan Exiles, then this shouldn't be a surprise to you. The team has been developing games in this hybrid space for decades. Dune is just a culmination of those efforts. Dune Awakening is set in the year 10,199 AG, about 8 years after the events of the modern Dune films. However, the game is based on an alternate timeline of events, which means things won't play out quite the same way. The key here is giving players the ability to meet and interact with characters they're familiar with, such as Duke Leto, who is alive and well within Dune Awakening. There are a number of other events that simply never happened in the game's universe. For example, Paul Atreides, well, he was never born, and Lady Jessica obeyed the Bene Gesserit and gave birth to a girl. These alternate events are all designed to shape a conflict between House Atreides and House Harkonnen, something we'll talk about more when we discuss the game's endgame. You play as a prisoner, sent to Arrakis to uncover the mysterious disappearance of the Fremen. It's nice to have a bit of backstory at the start, something we don't often get in many survival games. Your mission to find the Fremen guides your main quest called A Journey within the game, and it's where our entire Dune Awakening experience begins. Before ever stepping foot on Arrakis, you'll create your character, and we were surprised with just how many customization options there are. It's a rather deep system that I think most RPG fans will approve of, giving you control of both macro and micro parameters to tweak to your heart's content. Once you're satisfied with the way your character looks, you'll have to make 3 key decisions. The first is your homeworld, which will dictate your dialogue trait as well as grant you a unique emote. Depending on the homeworld you select, that dialogue trait will sometimes grant you different options when speaking to NPCs. Those interactions could potentially change the outcome of conversations, but that's something we've yet to experience ourselves within the game in any sort of detail. Giedi Prime assigns the Deception dialogue trait and grants you the Harkonnen Curse emote. Chuseok assigns the Culture dialogue trait and grants you the Chuseok Music emote. Kaladin assigns the Honorable dialogue trait and grants you the Atreides Salute emote. Kaitain assigns the Political dialogue trait and grants you the Kaitain Bow emote. And Ix assigns the Technologist dialogue trait and grants the Ixian Secret emote. Your second choice will determine your caste, and your choice here will grant you another dialogue trait. Bondsmen are an educated caste that serves the great houses and are known as the Citizen class, granting you the Bondsman dialogue trait. Na Familia is reserved for essential members of a noble household and grants you the Nobility dialogue trait. Finally, there's the Payan caste, reserved for the vast peasant labor force and grants the Payan dialogue trait. Your last decision will be to choose a mentor, which is the game's way of assigning you a starting class. Dune doesn't lock you into a specific class, and you'll eventually unlock each of the skill trees from dedicated trainers, so don't stress about this decision too much. The first class is a Swordsmaster that excels at close-quarter aggression. They get the starting ability Knee Charge, which allows them to shoot forward and use their knee to deal a burst of damage to the first enemy they hit. The second class is the Bene Gesserit, masters of the physical and manipulation. Their starting ability is Voice Compel, which forces a target to move towards the Bene Gesserit from far away, helpful when attempting to draw enemies out of cover. Then there's the Mentat, members of an organization skilled at recon and strategy. Their starting ability is the Sentinel, which allows the user to deploy a turret that automatically fires out darts to enemies within its field of vision. The fourth class is the Trooper, career soldiers that make up the backbone of military might of the Great Houses. Their starting ability is the Shigawire Claw, which allows them to latch on and rapidly pull themselves to a specific location. With those decisions locked in, your journey will begin in proper, and while we won't spoil exactly what happens, I will share that the entire first hour or so of the game is guided, which is a nice change of pace for a survival game. You'll learn some of the basic systems, but the entire thing is also tied to the game's overarching story and actually lays the foundation for the game's main quest, something we got to progress a few steps of as part of our early access hands-on experience. If there's one thing that's universal across all survival games, it's that feeling of uncertainty as you step out into the world for the first time. No guardrails, no guides, just you and the world the developers have created, and in the case of Dune Awakening, well, that world is Arrakis. She's hot as hell. Survival is the name of the game, and in Dune, that means keeping yourself hydrated and staying out of the sun as much as possible. The game features a unique mechanic where if you're exposed directly to the sun, a bar will fill up in the middle of your screen. If it fills up entirely, you'll quickly deplete your thirst, and if that reaches 0, then you start taking ticking damage. This mechanic forces you to either stay in the shade or be strategic about when you move through direct sunlight. Early on, when you're running everywhere, this can be a real challenge as the sun is constantly moving, creating and taking away shade at a steady clip. Thirst is one system you'll have to get comfortable managing, and it's this that I think a lot of players will struggle with early on. In my opinion, Dune's thirst mechanic is one of the most aggressive in any survival game that I've played, but that's part of the lore. Water is incredibly valuable on Arrakis, and you feel that from a gameplay perspective from the beginning. To start, your only source of water will be from small desert plants. You can interact with them to drink the dew and replenish just a small bit of your thirst meter. However, this only fills up to the first pip, and you'll quickly realize that's not sustainable. Shortly after, you'll be able to craft an improvised blood extractor as well as a small blood sac. After defeating enemies, you can use the tool to extract blood from the body of that enemy. You can either drink the blood for some minor hydration, or bring it back to your base where you can purify the blood, turning it into water. It is a process, but given that there's no hunger to manage in the game, it makes a lot of sense investing more into the thirst system. Once you unlock the ability to craft a leader John, you can carry water around with you, which becomes the primary way to stay hydrated during your adventures. If you really want to double down on water, you can craft a still suit, which allows you to recycle your sweat into a small reservoir of stored water within the suit itself, providing another option for maintaining your thirst meter at the cost of having much less armor than traditional gear sets. Now let's be honest, maintaining your thirst looks trivial compared to another survival aspect of the game, surviving the massive sandstorms that can engulf entire regions at a time. If you're caught outside of a sheltered area during a storm, you can quickly start to take ticking damage and will almost certainly die if exposed to the storm for more than a few seconds. Shelter, made by your hands or nature itself, provides you the only relief from these events, and if caught unaware at the wrong time in the wrong location, you and even your vehicles will absolutely fall victim to the storm. In order to survive Arrakis, you need to be smart about how you move about the world. As you no doubt know, it's a desert planet, and lurking just underneath the sand are giant worms that will eat anything if given the chance. One of the best survival mechanics in the game only happens when you're walking or riding across the open desert. As you move, drive, use abilities, or even activate certain types of gear, you'll attract the attention of the worms that lurk below, and if you stay too long where it's not safe, they'll breach the sand and hunt you down. If you mistakenly go through a patch of drum sand or quicksand on an open stretch, forget it, as a worm will almost always be close behind. It's one of the most terrifying yet satisfying survival mechanics in any game we've played, and it can only happen in Dune Awakening. Once you have a grasp on the survival elements of the game, it's time to start exploring Arrakis, and unlike most games, there are elements of both survival and RPG that you can tap into. Following your journey will allow you to complete various storylines, including the main quest to find the Fremen. But that's just the start. Contracts and factions will make themselves known early on in the game, and those also provide unique opportunities. Contracts are your standard MMO-style quest that takes you to various parts of a region and tasks you with killing enemies, recovering an item, or something in between. These are often part of a long chain and actually reward some unique items at the end, including Solari, the game's currency, and of course, experience. Factions start to appear in the second zone, Vermilius Gap, and this is where true Dune fans will start to see how the game is tapping into the extensive lore of the universe. You'll be offered the choice of which house to start aiding, either House Atreides or House Harkonnen, two diametrically opposed factions with you in the middle. These two houses represent the main forces of the Landsraad, which is a collection of all the great houses. More on this in a bit, and while we were gated to just the first two zones of the game, factions and faction quests are going to be a major part of Dune Awakening's overall experience. Questing isn't everything, and like a true survival game, pure exploration is just as important a part of the equation. Throughout each zone are a number of key areas, and as you get more comfortable with the game, your ability to explore further away from your base will provide you with some valuable opportunities. Caves are a regular feature of Arrakis and are small points of interest, usually occupied by a small handful of enemies. However, it's also one of the only places to acquire two important resources: micro sandwich fabric and EMF generators, essential for early game crafting. They also are great places to dip into if a sandstorm shows up. At the base of the many crags and rock structures that dot the desert are scavenger camps, which are smaller makeshift shelters that are again occupied by a small handful of bandits. You won't find specific resources here, but you'll find chests and usually some form of salvaged metal or fuel cells, which are always nice to have. I should mention that all chests and containers in the game outside of PvP areas have instanced loot, so if you play in a squad, you'll have a much easier time scoring large sums of resources to take back to base. Now, throughout each zone are a number of larger, more built-up encampments, which each have a unique name. The common theme here is that they are crawling with enemies and always have intel hidden somewhere in the area. This is the main resource used to research new crafting recipes, and thus becomes an important part of your overall Dune Awakening experience, as you'll end up needing all the intel you can find to tap into the full range of items that you can create and use. As you get into the second zone, you'll also discover Ironworks, which is a central spot to not only find iron, the tier 2 resource of the area, but also complex machinery parts and other crafting resources you're gonna need. This evolves as you expand into further zones, rewarding you with a core resource and sub-resources based on the zone that you're in. Within each zone, there are also shipwrecks, which act as another point of interest that provides critical resources, namely plasteel microflora fiber and mechanical parts. These wrecks offer a slightly different environment than the more standard bandit camp, but are equally filled with enemies, lootables, and even some valuable treasures. Some of these shipwrecks also function as PvP zones, so be aware of the notifications as you pass that new point of interest. There are also Imperial testing stations, which are the game's equivalent to a dungeon. They're linear in nature, but absolutely stuffed with enemies, lootables like chests and canisters, and almost always end with a sort of boss fight followed by a powerful reward. These testing stations are also tied to a various number of quests in your journey. The final points of interest are actually hubs, locations scattered across Arrakis that offer quests, contracts, vendors, and much more. I fully expect these to be a central part of the game's expansion post-launch, adding new and interesting things that all stem from these friendly outposts. There are even bigger social hubs, and the only way to reach those is by Ornithopter. You'll actually leave Haga Basin, the PvE zone, and travel to either Arrakeen or Harko Village, where you can engage with more MMO-style social content. When you enter a new zone, all of the points of interest we just outlined will be hidden, and the only way to reveal them is by using a survey probe. You'll learn this early on in your adventure, but you'll have to repeat it multiple times throughout the game as you explore each new part of Arrakis. To use the probe, you'll need a launcher, but you also need to be at a certain height. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is that in Dune Awakening, you can climb everything, just like you could in Conan Exiles. This allows you to reach almost every part of the world, no matter how high it is, and in this case, it's required. When you shoot the probe, it'll scan the region you're in, revealing all of the important points of interest and resources, giving you an overall lay of the land. It's a simple yet essential step to understanding the world around you. Getting around Arrakis is slow, to say the least, at the start, but eventually you unlock the ability to craft a sandbike, the first vehicle available in the game. These are essential for getting around each zone, which are sprawling. Sandbikes are made up of a chassis, hull, engine, PSU, and 3 treads, all of which you have to fabricate at your base. You can also add onto the bike with a few auxiliary pieces like a backseat, a booster, or inventory, providing some flexibility based on your needs. You can also define who from your guild can ride on these bikes, giving you an extra layer of permissions which some of the larger groups might find useful. As you explore deeper into Arrakis, you'll be able to craft other vehicles such as the iconic Ornithopter, Buggy, and Sandcrawler. Unfortunately, we weren't given access to these during our most recent preview period, but each becomes more important as you head into the deep desert, the endgame area, and start fighting other players over spice. We've seen glimpses of these vehicles throughout the various trailers and live streams, and have even tested them as part of the earlier alpha builds, and believe me when I say, they completely open up the game. Both the Buggy and certain Ornithopters can be outfitted with weapons that you'll end up using to fight off other players, which should make for some crazy times out in the deep desert. One of the best things about vehicles in this game is the ability to create and use a vehicle backup tool, which allows you to store a sandbike or scout Ornithopter, essentially carrying it with you and deploying it wherever you are. It's a great quality of life feature that is damn useful when trying to navigate across the world. One of the most important aspects of Dune Awakening is the combat. Don't let anyone fool you. You might already know this, but fighting on Arrakis is a bit different than fighting elsewhere in the universe, given the unique nature of the weapons and armor that are being used. However, before we get into that, we have to go all the way back to character creation. You're given the choice to be mentored by a swordsmaster, Bene Gesserit, Mentat, or Trooper, and that choice determines which skill tree you access from the start of the game. You can eventually unlock every class throughout the game, but doing so is tied to various quest lines from specific trainers, not all of which are readily available at the start of the game. Each class has 3 subtrees, and scattered throughout are abilities and techniques, both of which can be slotted, as well as some passive upgrades. For the Trooper, the first available skills are range damage, anti-gravity field, and the starting ability, Shigawire Claw. For the Bene Gesserit, the first available skills are Bindu Sprint, Compel Voice, the starting ability, and Recovery. For the Mentat, the first available skills are the Sentinel, the starting ability, Poison Capsule, and Shield Wall. Finally, for the Swordmaster, the first available skills are Blade Damage, Deflection, and Knee Charge, the starting ability. There's also a 5th skill tree, the Planetologist, which you can unlock through a special quest line early in the game. This class revolves less around combat and more around exploration, gathering, and vehicles. Once unlocked, you can slot up to 3 active abilities and 3 techniques, and this augments your melee and ranged combat rather nicely. While exploring and gathering, you might opt for one set of abilities, but while clearing out testing stations or going into PvP, you'll most likely swap it to another set, and the game makes it easy to accomplish this. You'll also have the ability to respec, claiming all of your skill points, but this can only be done once every 48 hours. Outside of the skills that you learn, you'll also need to craft weapons and armor. You'll learn various patterns as part of your research, but you can also discover unique schematics to weapons and armor, often gained at the end of more challenging points of interest or by completing a quest line. Weapons fall into a few different categories. Short blades feature lower overall damage but increased rate of attack. Long blades feature high overall damage but decreased rate of attack. For ranged weapons, you have sidearms, which deal lower overall damage and have less effective range, but a high rate of fire, larger mag size, and quicker reload speed. There are also specific disruptor weapons which can more easily take down enemy shields. Scatterguns feature insanely high damage up close, but drastically fall behind in nearly every other category, proving that shotguns really are only good at one thing. Rifles feature decent damage and range, but have a slower rate of fire, smaller magazine size, and often take a bit longer to reload. There are also some heavy weapons like the Vulcan minigun and Regis missile launcher that you can unlock towards the end of the research tree, and while we haven't gone hands-on ourselves, we can only assume that both will be staples on the battlefield, whether it's PvE or specifically PvP. One aspect of Dune's combat that changes everything is the Holtzman Shield, a craftable that you can equip and activate. These are widely used in the universe and prevent high-velocity projectiles from hurting the wearer. That's why melee weapons are such an important part of the Dune lore, because they're almost essential for defeating any enemy with a shield. When engaging in melee combat, you have your basic attacks, but you can also hold down the attack button to perform a slow attack, which penetrates the Holtzman shield and attempts to kill the enemy. This is the most effective way for taking down enemies with the shield, but you can also use the disruptor weapons I mentioned before, which fire specific darts designed to penetrate and disable shields. Because of the unique nature of shields in the Dune universe, players will need to excel at both melee and ranged combat to be effective in both the PvE and PvP elements of the game. In the first zone, enemies will rarely have shields, but that dynamic quickly changes in the second zone as you encounter much tougher enemies, many of whom have personal shields. This forces you to use everything in your arsenal, both weapons and skills, to disrupt and then eliminate enemies. There are also a variety of suspensor belts which aid your ability to move around the world and are most useful in combat. Early versions of the belt prevent you from taking fall damage, but more advanced versions actually let you hover and even move freely along a vertical plane. Of course, we can't forget about armor, which plays just as important a role in the game's combat. Each set of armor features 5 pieces, and while you can certainly mix and match to your heart's content, they're each designed with a certain function in mind. Scout armor has no standout defensive value worth mentioning, but it's lighter, and that means spending less stamina when dashing. Heavy armor is, as you can imagine, more robust, featuring more damage mitigation across the board, but it's a heftier stamina toll. Don't forget there are also still suits which do offer some meager protections, but are really meant to provide extra hydration, not defense, while exploring. One of the fundamental tenets of Dune Awakening revolves around gathering, crafting, and base building, 3 things that are intertwined in most survival games. At the start, you'll only be able to craft a handful of improvised items, but this lays the foundation for most of the things you'll be able to create in the game long term. However, first you need to gather some essential resources. The cut array is the tool of choice on Arrakis, and while they get consistently better as you reach new technology tiers, the process remains consistent. With the cut array, you'll be able to scan large gatherable resources like copper, granite, and even scrap metal. Once the scan is complete, a blue line appears somewhere on the resource, and you'll use the cut array to trace the line. Successfully doing so without deviating from the line will result in a good efficiency proc and slightly more resources. You can only store a limited number of items in your inventory, and there is a weight feature called volume in the game, but it's forgiving and allows you to move plenty of raw and refined resources before needing to come back to base to store everything. Every tool you create requires power, and throughout the game, you'll need to create and maintain a power pack, an ancillary item you can equip to give your entire array of tools and gear enough juice to function. Another important item you'll learn to create early on is the respawn beacon, which anchors you to certain points in the world. You can have multiple respawn beacons down across the world, which is helpful if you ever want to respawn at different bases that your guild has set up. Outside of the blood extractor and blood sack we talked about earlier, the rest of the improvised craftables are meant to get you just far enough to build your first base, which is when things really start to open up. Shortly after the first steps of your journey, you'll create the construction tool, and this is the device you'll need to construct your first base. At the heart of your base is the sub-thief console, which, once placed, claims the small plot of desert in a cube around the console. From here, you'll be able to use the construction tool to lay the foundation for your base, and you'll be happy to know that Dune Awakening uses a blueprint system that allows base builders to plan out their designs before committing resources. You'll have options when using your construction tool, and they're all aimed at giving builders freedom while reducing any frustrations. You can eventually also copy entire bases and then move them by pasting them into the world in different locations, a great quality of life feature and something we're really interested in for the deep desert. Build mode allows you to pick from any of your unlocked parts and lay the blueprint in your base. You'll have access to placeables, decorations, chome shelters, and eventually chome facility pieces, but all of this is set to expand post-launch with the introduction of new content. You'll also have a piece picker option, which allows you to select a pre-existing piece and automatically copy its design. Then there's the repair feature, which will be more relevant once you enter the deep desert and your base becomes the target of PvP raids. You can of course also move building pieces and stations using this tool, and finally demolish pieces, returning all of the resources used to create the piece. Powering your first base requires a basic fuel generator. Fill that up with fuel cells that you've gathered and you'll give your base power. This is necessary because it activates the sub-thief console, giving you the ability to set permissions for the territory and begin building the necessary crafting stations. From this point on, you should be familiar with how building a base works if you've played any other survival game. Crafting stations like the Fabricator become your bread and butter as they churn out new tools, weapons, and armor, but there are also refinery stations like the chemical and ore refineries that help you synthesize raw materials, turning them into necessary crafting reagents. As you unlock research by gathering intel at encampments, you'll continue to expand what you can create at your base, and while there aren't hundreds of craftables yet, there are dozens per tier across each of the 6 categories. Water Discipline, which is a combination of armor, tools, and placeables that all aid in the creation or storage of water. Combat, where you can create armor, weapons, shields, and medkits. Construction, which combines all of your crafting stations, tools, and building blocks. Exploration, which is a rather miscellaneous group of items that includes lights, suspensor belts, tools, and food. Then there's the entire array of vehicles, which includes the sandbike, buggy, ornithopter, and sandcrawler. And finally, you have unique recipes, which are only craftable once you acquire the necessary permit somewhere in the world. Again, permits are rewards usually found in science chests at the end of dungeons or intense points of interest, and give you the ability to craft one copy of that unique item. Crafting stations all function the same way, and it's rather straightforward. So long as you have the necessary ingredients, which can be stored in chests, you can click on the schematic and crafting will begin. Some stations, like refineries, take a longer time to synthesize raw resources, but most of the crafting and fabrication stations take just a few seconds to create items. Even with our limited access to the game, there were dozens of items that we could create at a handful of crafting stations, and when you get past the second zone, the system expands even more. I wanted to quickly touch on guilds, which might be something you care about in Dune Awakening. At the time of making this ultimate preview, you can establish a guild by spending 1,000 Solari, which sounds like a lot, but you can do that pretty quickly by hitting a few scavenger camps, especially with a few friends. Guilds can have up to 32 members, which is a much smaller number than we were expecting, and I actually feel this number might increase post-launch. Guilds currently have 3 ranks: leader, officer, and member, and while that's simple, it gets a bit more complicated when you access the sub-thief, the brain of your entire base. Within that system, you can set permissions, which is a slightly different hierarchy. There, you can set individual players as owner, co-owner, or associate, but this expands even more as you can set things to the entire guild, or even access to the public as needed. This gives you complete control over a few key things within your base. Most importantly, the doors, which you can set to allow or deny entry based on rank, all of which you can visibly see on the door itself. Owner is access level 1, co-owner and up is access level 2, associate and up is access level 3, entire guild is access level 4, and the public is access level 5. You can also set individual permissions on every storage container in your base, as well as the various vehicles your guild creates. Finally, you can set permissions on each individual crafting station, which might seem odd, but as your guild expands into the endgame and you want to protect those valuable high-end resources, it makes a lot of sense to also restrict access on certain stations. Your guild will also be aligned to one of the game's factions, either House Atreides or House Harkonnen, and this will determine which side of the war you support whenever you engage in the Landsraad session, one of the premier endgame activities with huge implications. One of the most important decisions you'll make within Dune Awakening is which faction to support, and that's because House Atreides and House Harkonnen are at perpetual war on Arrakis. We all know that the fight is over spice, but within the game, the Landsraad session is the key to planetary dominance. At first, this menu is a bit daunting, but the system is actually rather easy to wrap your head around. Each of the tiles represents a great house, and your goal as a faction is to contribute the most to as many houses as possible, accruing more points than the opposing house when the Landsraad session ends. Each house will have 1 or 2 objectives. The more common objective requires you to hold a specific control point within the deep desert. This is a PvP activity that grants you 10 points to the house's 70,000 point goal, and it's a great way for a more PvP-focused guild to contribute to the Landsraad session. The other objective is to deliver items to the House Quartermaster. Each house that has this objective wants something different, and this acts as a purely passive activity that more PvE-focused guilds can engage with to contribute to the overall Landsraad session. The faction with the most points at the end of the session will win, and after the event is over, guild leaders from the winning factions will get to vote between one of 3 decrees that will provide a sweeping, massive bonus for the winning faction. Some of the decrees we've seen include exclusive weapon import rights, which grants the winning faction access to the Landsraad weapon vendor, which we can only assume gives us access to some of the best weapons in the game. in Honor of the Fallen increases all ranged weapon damage by 33%, and Chom production contracts reduces the crafting cost of everything by 25%. I mentioned the Deep Desert before, and that's really where we should shift the discussion, because that is the endgame area within Dune Awakening. The real objective here is to farm spice blooms, which are much larger and more frequent than those found in the starting areas. Using the Sandcrawler vehicle, you'll need to identify these blooms and then harvest the spice before giant sandworms eat your convoy. In the Deep Desert, you also have to defend yourself from other players, as this is a fully PvP activated zone. While we weren't able to participate in this during the most recent early access preview period, Livid was lucky enough to play Dune Awakening as part of the testing group and got to experience the real coordination it takes to stay alive and thrive within the Deep Desert. Whenever a spice bloom erupts, it requires a joint effort to capture effectively. Scouts on sandbikes lure away sandworms using thumpers, while up above, a squad of players in ornithopters keeps an eye out for enemy teams and rogue sandworms that might have slipped through. Then there's the Sandcrawler team, who's got the most dangerous job of actually harvesting the spice. It's an incredibly delicate operation, made more challenging by multiple enemy guilds trying to disrupt your efforts, but if you manage to harvest spice, you'll have the most valuable resource in the game, required for the most advanced crafting recipes in all of Dune Awakening. So there you have it, our ultimate preview of Dune Awakening. I know it's a lot, but hopefully now you have a better sense for the game overall, and you're excited about the chance to go hands-on when the game goes live on June 10th. Legacy Gaming will be playing on the first available NA East server, and we will aim to have a large guild presence, so join up on our Discord, head over to the Dune Awakening channel, and connect with fellow survivors before launch. As always, if you like the video and you want to support the channel, hit that thumbs up and consider subscribing. It's still the best way to help Legacy grow. My name is Kodiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.